Today's event is about coaching and mentoring in the creative industries, and this is something quite close to my own kind of research heart, I suppose. I've been working with Judy on a project which I think she's going to mention hopefully in her section. Where I'd also like to welcome Katie Thomson Greene from Creative Mentor Network, who is our industry expert for the day. And the session today will work like this. I'm going to introduce our panelists properly, and then Judy will talk a little bit about coaching and mentoring from her perspective, someone who works at a university but also does professional practice in that regard. And then Katie will talk about the Creative Mentor Network. We're going to do a sort of online conversation in the middle section. But if anyone does have any questions for either of our participants or anyone involved in the talk, then please feel free to put them in the chat. Also, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, sometimes people make connections that way and it ends up sparking interesting little conversations and even projects. So please go ahead and do that as well. Okay, so the meeting is being recorded, as I completely forgot, and here's Judy's cat come along to save the day. The meeting's been recorded and may be shared on social media. So if you don't want your video image to be used subsequently, then please turn your cameras off. Obviously, keep your microphone muted whilst the main body of the talk is on. At the end, for the Q&A at the end, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask questions directly, that's absolutely fine. But for now, try and keep your microphones turned off, and we'll check that's happening as we speak. Okay, that's the sort of dull housekeeping done. Let me introduce our excellent participants. So Katie Thomson Greene has been working in education and charity sector for over 15 years. And she started out in educational publishing. Before moving into partnerships and sales operations, she developed her experience with youth programmes, organisations including the Challenge and Artist Foundation. And she currently works for Creative Mentor Network. We'll share all these links in the chat as we go along so you can have a look at what they do. And Dr Judie Gannon is the Director of Doctoral Programmes in Oxford Brookes Business School, which is a substantial job in itself, also a cat owner, and a member of the International Centre for Coaching and Mentoring Studies. Her research focuses on coaching and mentoring as interventions and their impact on individuals, groups and communities across a range of sectors, including the creative industries. And in 2019, she was the winner of an EMCC Global Mentoring Award. Have you got a trophy for that, Judy?
Do you know what? I've got a lovely little gold glass plaque thing.
You should have it behind you on the shelf somewhere. Okay, so so the next section of the session today, I'm going to ask Judy if she can manage to share her screen whilst the cat is there to talk a little bit about her work and introduce what she does. So thank you. I'll pass over to Judy.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, this is Lola, who has attended so many presentations and Doctoral 5 as an example. Hopefully you can see my slides now. So I'll do what I usually do. I'll wrangle a cat and talk. Let's think. Back in 2021, James, myself and Sylvia were awarded a small research grant from Oxford Brookes University to look at mapping mentoring in the creative industries. We've got a report that we can share with you. We've got an infographic that we developed, but it was an incredibly interesting study because one of the things that we were really trying to get our heads around was this whole aspect of how mentoring was playing a role in relation to the recovery of the creative industries. And of course, the creative industries is so diverse post-COVID. We've also recently published an academic article, which I think James is going to put in the chat. So our work in this space has really been something that's been fascinating in terms of thinking about the role of relationships and developmental relationships across careers in the creative industries. So the first thing that I wanted to do is also get you thinking a little bit around what coaching and mentoring are. Now, these are not definitive definitions, if that makes sense. They're definitions that I've used from the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and it's just really to try and outline and frame for you how we might differentiate coaching and mentoring that are going to be the focus for our exploration in the creative industries in this session. So the EMCC, which is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, talk about coaching as a process limited to a specific period of time that can support individuals, teams and groups in acting purposefully and appropriately in the context they find themselves in. And I've got a cat attached to me now. Okay, this is interesting. And then the coach works to support clients in achieving greater self-awareness, improve self-management skills, and increase self-efficacy. So they develop their own goals and solutions appropriate to their context. So that's coaching very much as kind of a more finite practice. And skilled in their own right, but very much directed towards what individual clients might need or coachees might need at particular points in time. Whereas we'd probably more familiar with mentoring, again, as a developmental process, but typically, and you know, this has flexed a little in recent years, where a more experienced person shares their knowledge with a less experienced person in a specific context through a series of conversations. So there's that flexibility a little bit more in mentoring, though often we have to give some kind of timeline and boundaries where we're using mentors to support people within mentoring schemes or initiatives. And occasionally we see mentoring as more of a learning partnership also between peers. I think one of the interesting things that where we can differentiate about mentoring again is this aspect of a less experienced person and a more experienced person. And we're often seeing now that we might have one person who's more experienced in an industry background, but the less experienced person, okay, doesn't have that industry or career knowledge, but they might have knowledge of particular personal characteristics, lived experience, issues all around diversity, inclusivity, and this is where kind of our interest in widening participation in the creative industries, which is obviously a very hot topic, came together. So that's my little bit of a pitch, and I'm going to hand over to Katie now. And thankfully, you don't seem to be wrangling any animals, Katie. So I'll just stop sharing as well.
I don't have any animals with me at the moment, so I'm safe. Thank you so much, Judy. That was really interesting. And hi, everybody, and thank you so much for having me today. I was just going to quickly introduce myself and Creative Mentor Network in a little bit more detail, I think, before we move on to some questions. So I'm just going to share my screen. You'll have to forgive me because I'm not the most tech savvy person, and we did try before and it was a little bit tricky. So we'll see if this works. Can everyone see my screen? Yes, great. Thank you, Judy. So as I said, yeah, I'm Katie, and I'm the CEO of Creative Mentor Network. So as James said, I've been working in the kind of education and youth based area for over 15 years, specifically at charities. So Creative Mentor Network, who are we? So we are a charity, and we support young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who are interested in learning about accessing and I guess developing and thriving within the creative industry. So I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute about why specifically we focus on the creative industries. We know that they are really difficult to enter into if you're from a lower socioeconomic background. So our mission is a day when the creative industries are more accessible and exclusive so that a person's socioeconomic background doesn't hold them back. I'm going to share this short video. This is where the tech went a little bit tricky. So if I'll just give it a go, and then if we have any problems, I'll just move on, but I'll press play now.
At Creative Mentor Network, we're working towards a day when the creative industries are more accessible and inclusive, so that young creatives can thrive, regardless of their socioeconomic background. Our work is centred around breaking down the barriers that many young people face on their journey into the creative world of work. These problems stem from outdated working methods, cracks in the education system, and wider societal problems. To solve this, we run mentoring programmes that bring together creative professionals with young people who want to work in the creative industries. Over our mentoring programmes, mentees will have the chance to develop their professional skills and work on key goals. This can be anything from applying to jobs, working on a creative project, or even launching their own business.
The main thing I learned from the programme was the kind of power of my social capital, the power of my experiences. I kind of took my experience a little bit for granted and didn't really think it could benefit anybody or any situation.
Our partners receive up to 10 hours of training in mentoring, coaching, and inclusive leadership. This gives them the tools to support our community, strengthen their leadership skills, and become advocates for diversity and social justice, and enabling them to help their businesses develop their DEI practices.
So I had so many avenues in my head that I wanted to go into, but we've really narrowed it down to what I want to do, and I've kind of got my foot in the ground and it's taken off, and I couldn't have done it without her.
Impact is at the heart of our organisation. This ensures that every young person we support and each creative professional that we train comes away from our programmes in a stronger position than when they started.
Being accepted onto the programme felt amazing. It's really given me focus and drive. It very much legitimises, I guess, something that is seen as quite not particularly legitimate, which is being in the creative industries.
And beyond our mentoring programmes, we help bring creative companies and young people together through our jobs board, creating more opportunities for diverse talent to find work and get hired.
My mentee is so ambitious. I've reignited that fire in me to just be like, just go for things.
To find out more about what we do and begin your mentoring journey with us, visit creativementornetwork.org/hello.
Thank you. Just going to, sorry.
Creative Mentor.
This is where we went wrong last time, James. Oh, there we go. So we touched on it in the short kind of film, but I just wanted to really quickly draw people's attention. So I know this session is around mentoring and coaching, and the way that we work with our young people is through mentoring and coaching practices, and it's an incredibly important part of what we do. But I guess the reason why we exist is because we know that there are those barriers to entering into the creative industry. And I just wanted to draw quick attention to this fact, really. So this is a slide that shows the composition of the UK workforce by socioeconomic background. So these stats are taken from 2021. I do have some more recent stats in the next slide. But as you can see, the UK workforce is kind of predominantly 38% professional background, 23% intermediate, and 38% from a lower socioeconomic background. If you then look at what this looks like for the creative industry, you can see that it really drops. And again, this is from 2021. The next slide will be from 2023. So you can see here that it's 26% from a lower socioeconomic background and it's 52% from a professional background. So what that means is that those from privileged backgrounds are twice as likely to be employed in the creative industry than those from working class backgrounds or lower socioeconomic backgrounds. if we look at this next slide, you can see that some recent data taken from a 2023 report that was released by the DCMS in 2024 shows that it's actually it's getting worse in the creative industry. I think people maybe naively assume that things are always getting better because there's more of a conversation around DE&I and diversity and around, you know, class and socioeconomic background. But actually we are seeing that the creative industry is getting worse, and it's definitely getting worse in certain sectors. So we know that in the film and TV industry, representation from working class creatives and people working in the industry has halved in the last 40 years. So that is kind of the reason why we exist and we do what we do. There's also about who's getting in and who's getting on. So we know that if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, it's not only going to be harder to enter the industry, it's also going to be harder to develop and, you know, receive promotions and climb into those leadership roles, but also to be paid more. So yeah, as you can see here, professionals from a working class background are being paid less than their more privileged peers in the same occupation. And it actually equates to around 12% less a year, which means that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are effectively working 1 in 8 days for free. So I just wanted to draw some attention really just to the reason why we exist as a charity and why we specifically focus on socioeconomic background. What we do is we pair young people from our community with people who are working in the industry. They may be in creative roles or, you know, non-creative roles, but working in the industry. And they receive mentorship over a time period. And what we also do is we provide training to those mentors, and that's a really important part of the programme. And I'm sure we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, if anyone does have any questions around our mission or around our eligibility criteria or how we support young people, I'm more than happy to answer them either in this conversation or after the call.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Thanks for introducing your work and what you do. I have a list of questions, but I've thought of one of my own, Judy. I hope you don't mind me going off script whilst Katie was talking. That statistic about the things that are actually getting slightly worse is obviously not encouraging. And I was wondering if how much of that do you feel is due to what happened during COVID? Because from our research, we know that a lot of smaller mentoring schemes and organisations just didn't kind of survive that period. The funding was cut. There's very little, obviously very little work happening. Everything was shifting online. So what, from your point of view, was the impact of COVID? And is that a factor in explaining why things are levelling off and not necessarily improving?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's definitely, we know that the young people that we work with, so we support ages 16 to 27. But once you've been on a programme of ours, we'll continue to support you. So we know that those young people have really struggled since COVID, and that's been for various reasons, obviously not being able to be in school and education, not being able to access those roles, the move to working from home. So obviously that's a really nuanced conversation of that better flexibility is a fantastic thing. And I definitely welcome working from home, but also I think when you're in a junior position, it can be tricky. I think it's also around businesses. So we know that so socioeconomic status is not a protected characteristic currently. So businesses don't have to measure this. We would really encourage them to do this. But I think that there has been a lot of focus in the last few years around diversity, as there definitely should be. So we know, obviously, off the back of Black Lives Matter, a lot of businesses were really looking at their DE&I practices and looking at around where they, where they recruit from, how they onboard junior talent, all things like that. I think that we're not quite there yet with the focus on socioeconomic diversity, because it's not a protected characteristic, and also I think because people can often feel quite uncomfortable about talking about class. Again, it's a very nuanced subject. Somebody can think that they are a certain class, or they can identify with being working class, when actually we look at someone's socioeconomic background. So we look at a couple of different measures for our eligibility criteria, which means that we're supporting young people that really will face those barriers. But I think COVID had a big part to play in that decline. I think also the cost of living and budgets are very tight. So therefore we see a lot with creative businesses. They then, their budgets get reduced. So certain practices they were put in place can get forgotten quite quickly. So something that we look at a lot is network-driven recruitment. So around 60% of people in the creative industry say they got their job from somebody they know, so through their network. And that is a real barrier to entry for the young people that we work with, because if you don't know anybody in the industry, it's really hard to find out about those roles and get those interviews. But on the other side, small creative businesses don't have huge budgets for recruitment and onboarding talent. So they may think, well, if we do a referral scheme in-house or in the business, or we find someone who knows someone, it's a quicker and cheaper option.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, because that really chimes with the kind of findings from our research, Judy, in terms of the challenges of the work that you do. And I just wanted to kind of bring Judy in here and think about what are the specific challenges of mentoring and coaching within creative industries as opposed to other types of industries. Obviously, the creative sector is very broad, and part of the problem of the research that we've done is trying to define which industries count as creative, and whether there might be creative roles in sort of non-creative industries as well. So it is a broad definition, but it has certain characteristics compared to other business sectors that make it possibly more challenging, or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of the things, because we see lots of precarity, so lots of freelance work, and some of the ideas that also kind of our understanding of the labour market, and while we see kind of sort of definitely very clearly the professionalisation of particular occupations across the creative industries, most people are, or a significant majority are, what we'd understand as neo-professionals. So they're operating an awful lot on their own. So, you know, being able to network to get peer support, but also being able to identify and prioritize your own development and support is challenging. So that, you know, that's one of the things that we really identified, as well as the kind of broader aspects of the kind of fragmented nature of the creative industries. So there's lots of complexity that's layered in there. And one of the things that I think is really interesting from our work is that aspect of, if we can actually identify how professionals, as they come into their creative industries, understand their developmental needs and know where to reach out to, that can have quite a significant impact, because you're going to need very different levels of support as you enter, maybe go through some aspects of education and training, early career stages. You might be moving slightly between sectors and in and out of projects. So again, how do you actually develop your network as you're doing that? Use coaching and or mentoring to get your support. So not just in the current project that you're in, but in your subsequent project, you know, having that eye to the future. So all this skill set is really, really important. And I think that's, you know, one of the reasons why Creative Mentor Network has had such significant impact. I'm sorry, I'm blowing your trumpet, Katie, but, you know, has had such significant impact because they recognise that balance between, if you can actually start young people with being able to know what the right conversations are and being ready and willing to kind of know that they'll reach out for more support in the future. Because being an independent professional, a neo-professional in the sociology of professions language, or a freelancer, then that means, you're going to get that development in an ongoing way.
Thanks, Judy. Katie, do you want to add anything to that? So, what are you thinking?
No, I just agree with everything that Judy said. I think it's really important. Obviously, we focus on more junior talent and that kind of entrance into the creative industry. But I think what Judy touched on about the labour market as well, that's a huge part of what we do. So if we're working with a young person who's kind of 16, 17, 18, they may not know anything about the creative industry. They may never have met anybody in the industry. And we know for various reasons, if you're getting the start of your careers advice, you're getting that at school and you're getting that within the education system. And we know that the UK education system is really stretched at the moment. Teachers are doing their very best. But what we hear a lot from our young people is that when they go to their teachers, or they go to, if they have a careers advisor, a lot of schools don't happen to have that. They if they don't know anything about the industry, they're often kind of told either not to enter it because it's risky, or that they don't know a lot. So I think it's that initial piece about learning about the industry, learning about the labour market, understanding the different roles within the industry. We know there are kind of hundreds of job titles in the creative industry as well. I come across them sometimes and I'm like, I have no idea what that is. And I kind of work within this industry. So I think it's really about unpicking that. But I also agree with Judy about it's at different points in your career, in your life, when you need different mentors. So we really encourage our mentee and mentor partners to continue that partnership, and we do see that, which is great, because when you're starting out in your career, you're probably going to need very different support and guidance from a mentor and coach than you are if you're 10 years, 15, 20 years in. And so we definitely see how important that mentor relationship is throughout your whole career. And I think, everybody should have a mentor if they can have one.
Absolutely. I suppose it's one of those things that happens naturally and informally in many sectors, but also that can be an issue, because the sort of natural relationships that happen are not necessarily equal in terms of power, and there can be issues there as well. I'm sure everyone's got stories of colleagues they've worked with that have been really influential and fantastically helpful to them, but also there's potential for sort of toxicity there, I suppose, which is where an organisation like you guys coming in with a bit more objectivity and matching people up, and I'm sure that's one of the advantages of going through you guys rather than just doing it, letting it happen.
Yeah. We see a lot as well in the creative industry. I'm sure it does happen in other industries. There is that very informal mentoring where people are kind of introduced to somebody and they're like, let's just grab a coffee and I'll talk to you about how I got into my role. And they do definitely have a place. But I think if you're working with a specific kind of group of people, especially the young people that we're working with, that can be quite an intimidating situation to go into if you've never been in a workplace or an office or a space like that before. And so I think it's just about preparing both the mentee and the mentor as much as you can for those sessions. I think as well, something we would love to see more of is our mentees to see themselves more in their mentor. Obviously, we exist as a charity because there is a problem within the industry, but that's something we're also trying to do, is we're trying to work with more creatives that have come from a lower socioeconomic background so that they can speak to their mentee about their own experiences of kind of moving through the industry as well. But I think sometimes, not to be negative, but sometimes more informal mentoring situations can often be a bit detrimental, because I think if you have a negative experience, you can then think this isn't the industry for me, or it can kind of put you off. Whereas I think and it obviously doesn't have to be us, but by engaging with a formal mentoring organisation, I think both parties are going to have a more positive experience, which is going to create greater impact.
Thank you. I've got a question from, so I have a question about virtual mentoring, about the shift to online, which I guess obviously is also one of the impacts of COVID, is that a lot of stuff that was happening face to face was shifted online very quickly through necessity. So to what extent do you work entirely online? Do you also try and do physical face to face meetings, or how does that work with your organisation?
So we work hybrid. So we work online and in person. So the way that we work is we partner with businesses in the creative industry. So some of our partners, we work with Sony Music, we work with Amazon Prime Video, we work with Soho House, and then we work with lots of different creative agencies and businesses of varying sizes. Pre-COVID, we actually used to deliver all of our training in person, which I just can't believe now because we deliver so much of it online. But I think, I'm not sure about everyone else, but when we went into lockdown, the thought of moving everything online just seemed so bizarre. And now it seems so bizarre that we were having everything in person, because it's quite a lot of time for mentors, and it was all delivered in London, which meant that we were restricted with who could attend the training and who we could engage with. So actually for us, it's been a really positive move to be able to have the option to deliver training both online and in person. We really encourage our mentors and our mentees to meet as much as possible in person. Obviously depending on where they're located and their commitments, but the more we can get our young people into their mentor's place of work, we do see a greater impact, because they're obviously then, not only are they going into kind of new surroundings, but they're also meeting other people and they're widening their professional network. And we also encourage them to take them out on, if they're on set, or if they're doing a pitch, or if they're doing a team meeting, or things like that. But we also see with our mentees and mentors, there's a mix of in-person and online mentoring, which we have seen a real increase in the amount of time that our mentors and mentees are able to meet and speak, which again is a real positive. So for us, it's been very positive, the move. And I think it means we get to reach more young people, more mentors, and they get to spend more of that mentor time. I think the only restriction or slight negative is that if a mentor or mentee are only doing it online, they're missing out on those in-person touch points where you can learn a lot from going into a business or being in a kind of creative setting.
Yeah, definitely. I think, education being one of the sectors which also had to pivot online, we've since found that our students now want to do everything entirely face to face, but there's also issues with attendance, which sort of hybridity can help with. So there's a desire to go back to face, I think, within an education setting, but not always the ability or appetite to, when it comes down to it. I wanted to turn to Judie and ask Judie to say a little bit more about this distinction between coaching and mentoring, because I think if people are not necessarily involved in this sector, they may confuse those two things or get them mixed up and presume they're basically the same role. But could you just explain the difference again, in sort of layman's terms, and what would coaching involve as opposed to mentoring?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. There are whole PhD theses and books written about this. So, I mean, if I pitch it from the actual the person who might be looking for support, one of the key things is, I think, having a sense of, is there a particular goal or outcome that you're orientated towards? And to me, that would speak more to coaching, because coaching tends to be more goal orientated, a specific issue that you want to be able to address, either in terms of developing your knowledge or gaining some understanding of your current levels of skills or practice. So that can be very important to kind of differentiate coaching on those terms. Mentoring tends to be much more of a long-term relationship, but that relationship may have different levels of intensity, and it may take a while for the mentor and mentee to to really be able to develop rapport and trust. And often it requires, for really impactful mentoring relationships, it often requires the mentor to be quite open and the mentee to be quite active in terms of asking the mentor questions about their experience, how they've tackled particular issues, not necessarily to get answers, in fact, not to get answers, but to get an understanding of how challenges can be addressed, and what you're not looking for as a mentee are the answers, but getting some sense of how you might tackle these issues given the circumstances that you're particularly in now. I think one of the difficulties in terms of coaches and mentors is that when we try and differentiate coaching and mentoring, the skill set is so similar. You know, we have to be able to ask effective questions. We have to be able to listen. We have to have a deep understanding of ourselves and how we work at a relational level. So, you know, and that's really important when we're supporting others in relational roles. In terms of coaches and mentors, though, we might be drawing very different boundaries around the support we're providing to other people. Typically, as a coach, we'd be very boundaried in terms of how long we're going to work together, how frequently we're going to meet, what exactly we're working on. In mentoring, it might be much more flexible and more in tune with what's needed at particular points in time. And also, you know, there's a big element around mentoring that is much more what we term psychosocial support. So actually giving that personal kind of sense of confidence and interest in the mentee to really get them to open up about what they want to do and explore, and you know, what their future might look like. Whereas probably with coaching, there's a little bit more kind of specificity there. So those are kind of some of the orientations that I think maybe are helpful for those who are wanting to work in the coaching and mentoring space as coaches and mentors, but also where we think about, actually, I'm stuck at this phase, or thinking about what my next transition is. So actually, what kind of support do I need? Do I need a coach? Do I need a mentor?
And Katie, does your organisation use both mentoring and coaching, or is it purely mentoring? How does that work?
Yeah, so we often talk about kind of putting your mentor hat on and then having to put your coach hat on. So the training that our mentors receive is they receive between 8 to 10 hours of training. So that's over a 16-week period of time. So it is quite a short period of time. And I think Judie's right in that a mentor, that's why I think we see our mentees and our mentors continue to meet after the program's finished, because I think you can have a mentor in your life for a longer period of time. Whereas I think when we talk to our mentors about kind of putting their coach hat on, it's more around that questioning, challenging, is there a specific project that their mentee's working on? Whereas with being a mentor, we talk a lot about supporting their mentee with their soft skills. So exactly like Judie said, thinking about how can they help improve their confidence, how can they help them work on their communication skills, their problem solving skills, teamwork. We see a lot with the with secondary school, young people are obviously the focus is on passing exams. And so we see a lot of young people coming out of secondary school and they don't have those soft skills that they need necessarily in the creative industry. And I think that often is just presumed that people will have, and some people will get that from their their own social network. And if you, as I've said, if you don't have that network within your family life or friends or, you know, wider social network, it's quite difficult. So I think for mentors, that's what we really kind of ask of the creatives that we're working with. But there's definitely an element of coaching within the sessions, and we have 2 training sessions that are specifically focused on unpicking kind of what does a mentor do and then looking at what a coach does. But we are conscious that it is quite a short time period. So the mentoring definitely happens once the program's finished as well.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining and clarifying on that one. I have a sort of devil's advocate type question, which is that I guess one of the things that came up in our research, Judie, was this sort of perception of coaching and mentoring, particularly around EDI, sometimes falling into the kind of box ticking category, or not, that people perceive that to be happening. So people perceive organizations are just doing this to try and secure some funding, or, you know, to be able to write the right kind of report to enable their organizations to continue. So I was wondering, how do you counter that kind of perception of kind of box ticking mentality that might circle around mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult because I think organizations often struggle to find interventions that help them address diversity, inclusivity, equality, and belonging often gets linked in with that now as well. And coaching and mentoring are seen to be sometimes a little bit of a, you know, an easy go-to. But it is much more complex than that. And you know, some of the research that we've done in the International Centre for Coaching and Mentoring Studies has really been, you know, around trying to challenge this idea that it's a systemic change that we really need to think about. And that doesn't just come from you know, trying to encourage particular groups that we want to see more participation at different in different occupations and at different levels throughout the organization. It isn't just about encouraging them to develop in the organization. It's also about actually getting the organization and the current set of leaders to think differently about what diversity, inclusivity, and equality mean, to recognize the value of people from diverse backgrounds, and to be ready to make those changes in a much broader sense. So there's one thing of kind of there's an explanation that organizations often use. You know, it's almost like if you are in a dirty pond and you're picking out individuals and saying, yes, we want you to be a leader, but you know, you're cleaning the fish, but you're putting them back into a dirty pond. So how do you start to clean up the pond? And sometimes, you know, coaching and mentoring aren't going to be enough. It's also about other interventions that are needed around supporting line managers, really thinking about broader HR policies that do really support diversity, inclusivity, and equality, thinking about actually the range of benefits and support you offer. So there is a sense of belongingness and people are going to stay in the organization rather than feel as, you know, my needs aren't met here. I don't feel included. I don't feel recognized, or the way that people are recognized doesn't align with my values. So it's about the organization knowing much more deeply about how to engage the populations it wants to reach out to. And this is why it's so important that organizations have kind of that open mindset of how can we develop this knowledge? How can we get to know what particular parts of the community that aren't really represented in our organisation currently? How do we get to know actually how to give them what they want and support their development in our organisation? So there's a big mindset aspect there. And sometimes it's not just organisations. We need to think across organisations. We need to think about, organisational bodies. We need to think about professional bodies. We can't just look at employer organisations and just go, that's where the problem is. We also need to think about some of the professional organisations that can also kind of filter through these messages and make sure that kind of there's not an exclusivity dimension there that is also playing a role in the situation we find ourselves in. You're on mute.
I'm muted. Yeah, thanks, Judy. Katie, do you want to add anything to that? Are you involved in that sort of advocacy, policy, advisory space as well? Or?
Yeah, I completely agree with Judy. I think it's a really big piece of work, which is why we combine mentoring with training. So the idea is that we're trying to tackle kind of two areas. We're trying to support young people to learn about the industry and to enter the industry and hopefully stay in the industry. But we're also trying to make change in the industry. And that's a really important part of what we do. And that's why we run our training. So our training focuses on really practical skills, like how to be a good mentor and coach, and things like asking open questions and global listening and having uncomfortable conversations and things like that. But we also look at things like the UK education system, the political landscape. We look at things like social and cultural capital. So a lot of what we see in the creative industry when you speak to businesses in the industry is that they might create initiatives or internship schemes or placements, and they're coming from I'm sure they're coming from a good place, but what they're trying to do is that we will sometimes hear they're trying to mold these people coming into the industry so that they fit into the industry. And what we're trying to work with the businesses that we work with is that the young people that we work with don't need to change coming into the industry needs to change. And I think the thing with the creative industry in particular is there is a certain cultural capital that is really expected and respected within the industry. So because it's not a very diverse industry, and it hasn't been for a long time, there is an expectation that everyone goes to the pub on a Thursday, or people go on the same holidays, or people watch the same things, or they have similar backgrounds. And that's because if you go into an agency and you look around, or you all sit around a table at lunchtime, probably the majority of people are from very similar backgrounds. So I think for us it's about really unpicking that with people in the industry, and it's not about kind of telling anyone off or wagging our finger at people. It's just about saying, first of all, a lot of the businesses we work with, you're pitching and you're trying to work with lots of different people. If we work a lot in advertising, you're trying to reach a real range of people, but actually if you look around who's around the table when you're pitching or when you're coming up with these ideas, do you have different diverse voices? And if you don't, why don't you? Because we know that it's better for business. We know you're going to make more money. So if that's the end goal, then that's a reason to do it. But also it's the right thing to do for your workforce. So I think it's really about getting businesses to understand that they have a responsibility, and it isn't a tick box exercise. We saw a lot of businesses approach us after the Black Lives Matter movement, and we obviously, as I said, we focus on socioeconomic background, but it did feel quite uncomfortable because we had a lot of businesses coming to us saying, we'd love to work with you, and it can feel sometimes uncomfortable if it does feel a bit like a tick box exercise. But also the way that we look at it is because we really get to know the businesses we work with, and we really get to know mentors. And to be on our program, you have to commit to attending the training. You have to make a time commitment. So you're not kind of signing something and saying we're going to do this and then no one's checking in on you, or you're not saying we're going to attend a one-off unconscious bias session training or something. So I think that for us, even if it is a tick box exercise initially, by attending the training and by learning about those barriers and learning the changes that you can make in your business, by the end of the program, we see a real result with our mentors. A lot of what we hear as well is that mentors didn't realize that they were going to get that reverse mentoring piece. They kind of think, oh, I really wanted to give back. I wanted to support. I wanted to do something. I wanted it to look good on my CV or my LinkedIn. But actually, at the end of the program, 9 times out of 10, people who have been mentors have learned so much from their mentee. So that's also a really important part, is that reverse mentoring.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to there's been some good questions in the chat, so I think we'll move on to there now. There's a question from my colleague, Daniela Gennari, who's my colleague here at Brookes, asking Katie whether you work directly with educational organisations such as universities. And I guess the leading question there is, would you like to come and speak to our students at some point? We'd love to have you.
We do. So from an outreach perspective, we do. So our outreach manager, Freyna, she will go into universities, colleges, careers fairs, work with local authorities, and we will try and talk to as many young people as we can about what we do, about the creative industry, about getting them involved in our programme. From a kind of partnership perspective, so we are funded by our partners. We have done so we did a project with the University of Kent a few years ago, which was really interesting, and we would love to work with more universities. So that particular programme, we worked with 15 young people, and we paired them with mentors along, it was around the Thames estuary. So we paired them with mentors who were in the creative industry. So yes, we would definitely love to work with more education kind of areas, and we'd love to come in and talk. So yeah.
And we'll get you lined up straight away.